Responsive design is a crucial aspect of modern web development, and it ensures that websites adapt gracefully to various screen sizes and devices. And by utilizing responsive design principles, you can effectively build user interfaces and accessible websites that can cater to a diverse set of audiences from any set of devices. And in fact, this is important because over 70% of web traffic today comes from mobile and maybe another 10% from smaller tablets. And there's only about 10% of traffic that comes from the large desktop screens that we typically develop our websites on. So there is a bit of a disconnect in terms of what developers look at when they're developing websites and what people look at when they're actually browsing these sites. So we'll talk about using CSS media queries and breakpoints to implement a mobile-first and responsive web design. We will also talk about leveraging the various properties offered by the CSS Flexbox layout model to build fluid and dynamic layouts. We will then learn how to create separate wireframes to determine the layout of a web page at various breakpoints. And this is how designers will often share designs with you. And finally, we will talk about implementing, testing, and deploying a responsive website using CSS media queries and Flexbox. And of course, the best way to learn these skills is to follow along step by step and type out all the code yourself. If you have not been doing that, if you have not been typing out all the code yourself, you're making a big mistake. It is going to severely slow down how much you're going to learn. So type out all the code yourself, question everything that you do. And if you get stuck at some point, please ask us. We have also just added a lot more one-on-one support call slots, and we're also decreasing the amount of time that we take to respond to your queries. So please feel free to get all the help that you need. All right. So here is a problem statement that we look at today. Now, in the previous lesson, we built a Jovian careers website. So this is what the website looks like. We have a navbar here with the Jovian logo. We have this banner image that says do something great. We have an about Jovian section that talks about our mission and talks about the 2 programs we offer along with a picture. We have an employment opportunities table. We found that a table was a nice way to showcase some employment opportunities. So that's great. And then we have this submit your application form where people can fill out their name, email, phone number, date of birth, select a position, upload a resume, add a cover letter, agree to terms and conditions, and submit the application. And finally, at the bottom, we have a footer. So this is the website that we have been developing step by step over the past few lessons. However, this same website, if you've tried to open it on mobile, you will see that it doesn't really show up properly. What happens on mobile is this image takes up a lot of space. There's a lot of blank space above and below it, above and below this do something great part. So we might want to reduce the height of the image on mobile. You may also notice that on mobile, it doesn't really make sense to show these side by side, the text and the image. Maybe it'll be better to show the image below instead of on the side. Then you will also notice that the table does not show up completely on mobile. The table actually goes out of view, and that requires horizontal scrolling, which is not a great experience on mobile. And finally, the application form as well. It feels a little cramped on mobile, and it would be nicer if there was more space on mobile for each of the input fields. So we will try and improve this website to make it more mobile friendly, or what's called responsive. And here's what we're going to do. We are going to use different layouts for different screen sizes to ensure that the page shows up properly on any device. So it's going to look different on mobile, it's going to look different on tablets and different on desktops. We're going to use CSS Flexbox to make the layout more fluid and ensure that it adapts properly to any screen width. And we will also set up a GitHub repository, a new one, so that the old one is not affected. Now, normally you will continue working on the same repository. However, just so that you have access to the old code as well, we will set up a copy of the previous GitHub repository. And we will also deploy this new GitHub repository to the cloud using Vercel. Okay. And of course, we are assuming here that you are familiar with the previous lessons, which is HTML and CSS basics, advanced HTML and CSS, and version control with GitHub and cloud deployment with Vercel. The code for this tutorial can be found here. So this is the starter code. So I'm just going to open this up here. This is a GitHub repository which contains the starter code. You can see here that there is an SRC folder here, and inside the SRC folder, there is a There is an index.html file and there is a styles.css file. These contain the HTML and the CSS for this Jovian careers site. Okay. You can also check out the starter site, which is what we looked at just now. So this is the starter site that we are going to work on today. And I encourage you to take this URL and open it up on your mobile phone to confirm that it actually does not look very good, so that you can compare it with the changes that we're making today. And you can find the completed code and the finished site here. Now, to work on this tutorial, we will create a new repository containing a copy of our original repository. Let us open it up here in a new window. So this is the repository that we want to create a copy of. Okay. Now, normally, if you want to create a copy of a repository that is owned by somebody else, you can just click this button called fork. And what fork will do is take the GitHub repository that is part of somebody else's profile and copy that completely to your own profile as a separate copy so that you can do your own development there. But sometimes you have to fork your own repository and GitHub does not allow forking your own repository. So I'm going to show you a quick way in which you can create a complete working copy of your GitHub repository as another new repository. So here is how we do that. Go to github.com and on github.com, click the new button here. So I'm clicking the new button. And when you click the new button, you will get the option to create a new repository. So let me call this repository Jovian Careers Responsive Live, because I'm going to create a responsive or a mobile friendly version of this site and I'm doing this live. So I'm just going to calling it Jovian Careers Responsive Live, a responsive version of the Jovian Careers site. Okay. I am going to leave this public and I'm not going to add a README, git ignore or license. So this time I'm creating a completely empty GitHub repository. So once I click create repository, now a completely empty repository gets created. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to take this GitHub repository and import all the code from this GitHub repository into my new repository. Okay. This is the repository for the previous lesson. I don't want to disturb it. Now, normally in a job, you will probably be continuing to work on the same repository, but just for demonstration, I'm showing you how to create a copy so that the previous lesson doesn't get affected. Okay. So there are many ways to add code into an empty repository. You can check out some of these, but here is one called import code. So what you can do here is click on the import code button and then grab the URL of the old repository. So here is the old repository. I'm grabbing the URL Jovian Careers site and I'm going to copy the code from or import the code from the old repository into this new repository Jovian Careers Responsive Live. And I'm going to click begin import. Okay. Now this is going to take a couple of minutes to maybe import the entire code depending on how much code you have in your repository. All right. And once we have this, we will be able to now see our new repository and make changes there without affecting the old one. Okay, so our import is now complete. So let's open it up and I can close the old repository. So now I have a new repository with my starter code all in place without affecting the old one. Okay. All right. So that's what we just did. We created a duplicate of a GitHub repository by creating an empty repository, not including a README, git ignore or license, pressing the import code button and providing the URL of the starter code. Okay. Now, of course, as I mentioned, if you are on somebody else's repository, you can do all of this very quickly using the fork button. So you can see that there is a fork button here, which is disabled for me because this is my own repository, but will be available for you when you need to. Okay. The next thing we'll do is we will also deploy our new repository to Vercel. So I'm just going to open up vercel.com, and Vercel, as we know, is a deployment platform that has good integration with GitHub. And once you're logged in on Vercel, I'm going to add a new project. So I'm going to say add new project. And if Vercel is not already connected to my GitHub, then it will ask me permission to access my public and private GitHub repositories, which I have already granted. So here I can see on Vercel that I have the option to import the Git repository Jovian Careers Responsive Live. So let me just go ahead and import that. And that is going to create a project. And I'm going to use a framework preset other because I'm not using any framework. It is just a static site with some HTML and CSS. And then I'm just going to click edit and I'm going to go into src because I don't want the entire folder to be deployed. I don't want the entire repository to be deployed. You can see here, I simply want the src folder to be deployed because that is where my index.html file or my default web page is present. Okay, so I'm just going to select the src folder and click continue, and then I'm going to click deploy. And just like that, in just a few seconds, the repository will get deployed and I will have my new website, Jovian Careers Live, Jovian Careers Responsive Live. Let me see, I can just continue to dashboard. And now I have my new project, Jovian Careers Responsive Live .vercel.app. Okay. So now the repository is completely deployed to Vercel, and any changes that we make will now be affecting this new site. Okay, perfect. So that's our basic setup in place. So that's good to go. Now let us come back here and also open up this code using GitHub code spaces so that we can actually start writing some code and start editing things. So I'm going to click on code, and here now I can create a new code space on main. And remember, a code space is a local machine for us on the cloud given by GitHub associated with this repository, and we'll be able to write our code in that code spaces machine. So let's click create code space on main. And by the way, if this button is disabled, you may have to go ahead and delete some older code spaces. So you can go to github.com/code spaces. And I think GitHub provides 2 code spaces for free. So you may have to go in and maybe delete an older code space. So you can just go to an older code space and click delete. And that's going to delete your old code space so that you can now reload this page and actually access this button. Okay, so you can have at least only 2 free code spaces. Otherwise you can pay and you can get unlimited number of them, but free should be fine. You can just delete code spaces when you need. Okay, so let's click code and then let us click create code space on main, and let me bring this over here. Now what this is going to do is open up a machine on the cloud, get the code from the repository, and give me a browser-based interface of Visual Studio Code to edit and test and develop the code from this repository. Okay, so GitHub is for storing the code. Visual Studio Code, code spaces is for actually developing the code. And then I can take my changes and push them back either onto the main branch, or I can use the GitHub collaboration workflow where I can create a pull request and get that reviewed and so on. Okay. All right, so looks like our code spaces system is now open and ready for development. So I'm just zooming it in a little bit. So you can see that this is a Visual Studio Code interface, and let me just close that. Now here we already have the repository, the root file of the repository open. You can see that we have an src folder. We have gitignore, license, readme. All of these were imported in from the original repository. I can open up the src folder and open index.html. And here in the index.html file, I can see the entire code for my website, Jovian Careers. So you can see that we have a head, we have an HTML tag inside which we have a head tag. In the head tag, we have a bunch of meta tags to set how this page previews when we share it online. We also set, for example, the title and the favicon of the page. Then we have the body tag, and in the body, we have the nav bar. And this is the nav bar. We have a banner image. This is the banner image. We have a header. We have an about section with an image and some description. Then we have a table here. The table contains the employment opportunities. Then we have a form here, an HTML form. And that form makes a submission to FormBold, which is an external service that we're using for form submissions. And finally, we have a footer here, which is the footer right over here. Okay. And of course, we have all of the styles here captured in styles.css. So each section has its own various set of styles, which is what we have captured in styles.css. So there are some basic styles for HTML, body, H1, H2, etc. And then there are section-wise styles for each section, and then the subsections inside those sections, and so on. Okay. And we have certain images as well, which we are incorporating within the page. And of course, we are connecting the styles with the main page using the link here, the link rel equal to style sheet. Plus, we're also using some external fonts from Google APIs, from Google Fonts. Okay. So this is the basic setup that we've explored so far. All right, so now we've looked at how to deploy to the cloud using Vercel. We've looked at how to start development with GitHub code spaces. Now let's talk a little bit about responsive web design. Responsive design is an approach that ensures that websites adapt gracefully to any screen size, any device, and any orientation. And that is the purpose here is basically to optimize the user experience by making the content visually appealing and easily readable and accessible. Okay. Now, responsive design starts from the user interface design. So even before you have started coding the page, user interface designers will often create design mockups in 3 to 4 sizes, depending on the available screen width. So they will create a mobile design. So let's say they're designing a website. They will first create a mobile design. And in the mobile design, everything just goes top to bottom. You generally don't have a lot of things side by side because the screen width is very limited. And in fact, just as a common practice, something around 576 pixels and below is considered a mobile screen, just for reference. So typically you will get a mobile design which is something under 576 pixels in width. Then they will often give you a tablet design. Now the tablet design will have maybe 2 columns in certain places. In certain places it will still have 1 column. So certain things you have slightly more space horizontally on a tablet, and that's why there might be a slight change. You can see that these 2 sections were brought in here on the side on a tablet screen. And typically tablet screens are about 550 to 750 pixels. And then you have desktop screens. Desktop screens are screens that are bigger than 768 pixels. So this is where you have a lot more space. This is where maybe you can use 3 columns. This is where maybe you can have more space on the left and right. And finally, optionally, sometimes you will find a layout for large desktops. So often now as we are getting to bigger and bigger screens like 4K screens and 8K screens and so on, we have the opportunity to leave a lot of blank space on the left and right. So sometimes, especially if your website is going to be viewed by people primarily on the desktop, you may get a 4th mockup or a 4th design for very large desktops. Okay. And typically this refers to desktops with a screen width of greater than 992 pixels. If you don't get a design like this, then you should just take the hint that you should take the desktop layout and just limit its width so that the content remains centered on the page instead of completely spreading left to right, making it hard to read. Okay. So your designer will often give you 3 separate layouts at least, and sometimes even 4, or sometimes you may just get 2 layouts, one for mobile and one for desktop, and you may have to guess what the tablet layout looks like. Okay. Now, the specific widths at which these design changes are made, where the design changes significantly, are called breakpoints, because the previous design breaks at that point and a new design takes over from there. Okay. So the breakpoint for mobile screens is 576 pixels. Beyond that, it's the tablet screen. And then the breakpoint for desktop screens is at 768 pixels. Beyond that, it is a desktop screen. So the breakpoint or the highest breakpoint for tablet screens is 768 pixels, and beyond that it is a desktop screen. And then sometimes beyond 900 pixels or so, it is a large desktop screens. Now these numbers are not set in stone. These are just some common values, but different sites, different frameworks that we use for CSS have different values, but these are just some of the more standard ones. Okay. Now, your role as a web developer is to implement layout changes at specific breakpoints while ensuring that the page adapts gracefully at all intermediate screen widths. Okay. And that is what we're going to learn today. Now, one important thing to keep in mind whenever you're trying to make a website responsive is that to implement a responsive web design, you must include this following meta tag within the head tag of your web page. So there's this meta tag with the name viewport, and it has the content width, device width, and initial scale equal to 1, or sometimes this is written as 1.0. And you have to take this and you have to put this inside the HTML head tag of your HTML page. Okay. Now in this case, I already have it, meta viewport. Let me zoom in here slightly. Yeah, you can see here I have the tag meta viewport with device width initial scale 1.0. Why is this important? Well, back when mobile smartphones just came out, there were no designs that were optimized for mobile screens. So there were certain tricks that were employed by mobile devices to zoom in and somehow scale and make the text more visible. Nowadays, those tricks are no longer required because developers implement responsive designs. So that's why to indicate to your browser, to indicate to the device that please don't apply any tricks to make the content look good on mobile, I will handle it myself. You include this meta tag. Okay. So all you need to know is whenever you're making your design responsive, make sure that you have this meta tag included in your design. Okay. So one good way to build your responsive design skills is just by checking out some examples of responsive design. So here's one. You can check out a bunch of examples here. So here is one, Dropbox. The home page for Dropbox is a good example where this is the mobile view, this is the tablet view, and this is the desktop view, which also contains a form. Here's another one. This is Dribble. It shows images. So here you can see that on mobile, it shows two images side by side. On desktop, it shows five images side by side. And then on tablet, it's somewhere in between. GitHub is another example that there is often you will find this pattern that in the desktop layout, there is space on the left and right. There is possibly a form in somewhere on the right. And then on tablet, the form comes in the center. And on mobile, the form can go away altogether. Okay. And there are a bunch of other examples that you can check out as well. Similarly, there are again some more examples here for you to check out. So whenever you're trying to make your website responsive, it's useful to look at how other websites are doing it. You can see here examples of Design Modo. So they have this layout for mobile, tablet, and desktop. You can see this architecture side. They have a different layout for desktop, tablet, and mobile. And here's another one. This seems to be like a personal website. So to become a good web developer, you have to go and explore what other people are doing. There are no ground rules. There are no set rules for responsive design. In fact, these trends are constantly emerging. So just explore and pick whatever you feel is working well. Now, how do you develop a responsive websites? So you can inspect how a website looks on mobile by simulating other devices within your browser's developer tools so that you don't actually have to go and open that website on your mobile each time you want to test it. That's a good idea. You should always do a final device test, but you can just do that within your browser itself. Let me show you an example. Let us open up this Jovian career site and let me just zoom back to 100%. So this is what the career site looks like on desktop. If I right click and I select inspect, now that opens up these developer tools and I can just put these developer tools on the right. So there is this button here on the corner, this three dots button, and I just click this three dots button and dock the developer tools to the right. Okay, so now my developer tools are on the right side. It's exactly the same, but I'll show you in a second why putting it on the right helps. And now there is this button over here, and I'll just zoom in and show you. So this button is called Toggle Device Toolbar. So if you just press this button, now suddenly your browser turns into a mobile device, and you can go in and select a specific device as well. Let's say, let me select iPhone 10R. So this is iPhone 10R, and this is what my mobile, and this is what my website is going to look like on iPhone 10R. Okay, I can even check that the screen width here is 414 pixels. Let me just zoom in there a little bit. So the screen width here is 414 pixels. So that tells me that this is an iPhone 10R. Or I can even just select the option responsive and I can just vary the width of the screen and see how my website changes. So normally you will not be viewing a website on under 360 pixels. So normally you might want to start around 360 pixels and just vary the width of your screen slightly and see how the website looks as you increase the width. Okay. So this is a great idea. This is a good way for you to inspect how things are going. You can see that definitely there's a big problem here. The table doesn't look good at all on mobile, and it starts to look a little better when we go into tablet or maybe even desktop screen. Okay. And one good idea for you would be to open up developer tools on your browser, turn on device mode, and see how various pages and websites look with different device widths. You can check out Jovian. So let's check out jovian.com, our homepage. Let's start with mobile. This is what it looks like on mobile. So on mobile, we just have this text. We have this explanation here, we have these two things, and you can see that the text is centered on mobile. Then we have this logo cloud, and then we have a form below it, and then we have all of these benefits that are shown one below the other. As we go on a tablet screen, you can see now that the text is still centered, and but now we've put a maximum width for the logo cloud, we've put a maximum width, we've added space around the form, and now we are showing two of the benefits on the same row. As we go further, let's go on to a desktop screen. So now we've gone beyond the 900 pixels or so, which is a desktop screen or a large screen. And now you can see here that we have a bunch of options here in the nav bar. Then we have left text and we have a form here. And then we have now all four benefits listed on the same page, on the same row. And of course, there are similar changes that are there on each section as well. You can see here intensive programs. Here goes one in each row instead of two per row. Okay, you can see that, okay, maybe this is something we need to fix. So looks like in the pricing div, we haven't taken care of spacing. And this is what happens when you are building responsive websites. There will be slight cases here and there, a certain place where you've not thought about how things should look, and you'll have to go and fix it. And that is why it's important to check across the entire range of widths. Okay, let's check another one, nytimes.com. So this is what the New York Times looks like on mobile. You have a very little space on mobile. That's why there's just this title and then there is this nav bar. And we'll touch on how to show these nav bars at a later point. And then there is just this date and there's the sale offer going on. Then there is just one story and then another story below it and so on. But as you start to increase the width, you can see that now we go from one story to multiple stories. And we also get this second bar here, which opens up a bunch of categories, and we also get something here on top. We also get maybe a login button and all. So things change significantly based on the screen that we're on, right? And you can see now we go into 3-column layout when 3 columns are available. So a lot of time is spent by designers deciding where exactly to change the layout, what the breakpoint should be, and what the structure should be for the site. And really, this is where a lot of the time is spent just fine tuning small things and testing things carefully. Okay, so I encourage you to maybe explore a few more sites and see how they work. Now, certain websites redirect to a completely different page when you try to access them on mobile. For example, if you were to open Gmail on mobile, it will redirect to a slightly different page or show a completely different design. That was a common practice earlier, but now that there are many tools to or many techniques to build completely responsive layouts, it's not recommended any longer. So try to find some websites which follow this outdated pattern and avoid it when you are building websites. Instead, what you should do is build something called take something called a mobile first approach, which is what we look at today. Let's talk about CSS media queries. CSS media queries are a powerful tool that allow you to apply different styles to your web page based on device characteristics such as screen size, resolution, and orientation. And here is the basic structure of a media query. You say at media, and then you specify a media type, and then you specify a condition, and you can have one or more conditions. And then you open up these brackets, and inside these brackets, the CSS rules that you write will only apply when you are looking at this particular media type and you're looking at this particular condition. Okay. Now, when you're working with responsive web design, the media type is almost always going to be screen. So there are 3 types of media. There is the screen, and then there is print, and there is all. Now, print is used, the print media type is used when you try to print a page or export it as PDF, which is not something we're going to look at today. So in our case, the media type is almost always going to be screen, or it can even be all. And the condition is something that you can set based on the width of the screen or the orientation of the screen, or there are a bunch of other properties that you can use. So here is an example. Let's say we want to change the background of the body when the screen width is at least 768 pixels. Let's say on mobile screens, we want to have a separate background, and then on large screens or desktop screens, we want to have a separate background. So here is how we might do it. We can say at media, and then we can say screen because we only want to affect the screen layout, not the print layout. And then we can say and now we can specify a condition. Min width is 768 pixels. So when the minimum width of the browser is 768 pixels, then we can specify that the body should have a background color of light blue. Okay, so let me just copy that and let me put that into my CSS file. So here I am in my CSS file, and maybe right below here, the main body declaration, I'm going to add this at media screen and min width 768 pixels. That means at a minimum width of 768 pixels, when the condition holds true, for the body, I want the background color to be light blue. Okay, right. Now, I need a way to actually preview the changes that I just made. What I'm looking at here on the left is the deployed website, but I'm making changes in my GitHub code space. So what I need to do is I need to launch this GitHub code space, this index.html file in a preview. And remember, for preview, we actually use an extension called live preview because our code space is a system somewhere on the cloud. And we need to now view the HTML code in our browser as a web page. And for that, we can use this live server extension. Okay. So let us open up the live server extension. So search for live server by Ritvik Day and click install in code spaces. And again, all of this is covered in the previous tutorial, so you should review that in case this doesn't make sense. And now let's come back into index.html and let us right click on index.html and click open with live server. Okay, so now what this is doing is this is going to set up a simple server which is going to serve the file for us so that we can now view it in our browser. And let me just bring that and put that here on the left. Let's bring this back here on the right. Okay, so now I have this styles.css, and I've mentioned here that whenever the screen width is more than 768 pixels, my body should get a light blue background. Clearly, it has gotten a light blue background, which is not looking good, but it demonstrates what we are looking for. But let me go in here and let me also click inspect, and let me just reduce the width of the screen. Let me reduce it down to maybe an iPhone XR. So you can see that when I'm viewing the same page on a mobile device, it is still has a white background, but on this device over here, it has a blue background. And you can see the exact change happens at 768 pixels. So as I increase, you can see that just before 768 pixels, it is still white, but at 768 pixels, it turns blue. Okay. So you can do all sorts of things like that. Let me change another thing. Let me maybe set the body font size to 10 pixels or to 20 pixels. Well, let's just make it 24 pixels so that the font size also changes drastically. So here you can see that I have below 768 pixels, and then as soon as I cross 768 pixels, the body font size should change. Well, okay, it didn't. I just need to reload the page maybe. Yeah, maybe if I just remove this, it might change. Well, it doesn't seem to be changing right now, but it will, depending. Maybe I just have to like set the properties properly, but you can set any property here and the font size can change significantly for that particular tag and or for that particular selector based on what property you set here. Okay, so for now, I'm just going to revert it, and below 768 pixels, the background is white. Above 768 pixels, the background is blue. Okay, so that is how you use media queries. And let me just get rid of this for now. But one other thing you can do is also combine a bunch of conditions. So you can say something like this, that you want a particular CSS rule to apply only between min width of 600 pixels and max width of 1024 pixels. So at 600 pixels, you want it to start, and that same set of rules, you want them to end at 1024 pixels. You can imagine how using this, you can set up maybe one layout for under 400 pixels, one for 400 to 600, one for 600 to 800, and so on. All right. Let's look at an example of this. Let me just take this and let me put it in here. Now I'm going to put a couple of layouts. I'm going to say that let me just make it 400 and 800, 600 pixels just so that we can actually view the changes very easily. Now what I'm saying is that under 400 pixels, I have a white background. And then as soon as I touch 400 pixels, the background turns blue. But as soon as I cross 600 pixels, the background turns white again. Okay. So do you see what's happening? You can combine multiple conditions like this. And you can also do something like this. Let's say I want to only have a condition for max width. So then I want to say that only under 600 pixels, the color is blue, and over 600 pixels, the color is going to be white. So as long as this condition or all conditions are satisfied, these CSS rules apply. And I don't just have to put body here. I can maybe change the H1 color, change the H1 size here. I can put maybe change some other size here as well. So I have all those controls that I can modify. Okay. Now, of course, you don't only have to look at the screen size. You can also use the orientation. So let's say you want to use a certain font size only in a certain orientation. You can do that too. Let's maybe try that. So only in the landscape orientation, we want the light blue color. So orientation, landscape, and the orientation is also a piece of information that is sent by the browser itself. So let us go to iPhone XR and let us change the orientation here. So there's a button here. You can see that there's a button right here to change the orientation. You can see that now this is in landscape orientation, and in the landscape orientation, it has a blue background. And I can change it back to the portrait orientation or the vertical orientation. And in this case, it does not have the blue background, right? So let's bring that back and let us get rid of this. So that is how media queries allow you to change the layout of a page at various breakpoints. And that is what we're going to use today. Okay. You can combine multiple conditions, and you can check out some information about media queries here. But we've covered the most common use case. You'll be using the screen media type, and you will be using maybe the max width or min width to set breakpoints. Specifically, as we said earlier, breakpoints are the points at which your design changes to adapt different screen sizes. Based on the designs that your UI designer has given you, you may have to set some breakpoints. And these are generally set on some common device screen widths. So media queries can be used to set breakpoints and apply CSS rules for each layout. For example, if you want to write completely separate CSS for mobile, tablet, laptop, desktop, and large desktop screens, you may do something like this. You may have one section in your CSS file which only deals with mobile screens. So you may say media screen and max width 576. So under 576 screen width, all these rules are going to get applied. Okay. Then you may have maybe another media query here called media screen and min width as 576 pixels and max width as 768 pixels. So between 576 pixels and at maximum width of 768 pixels, so between these two widths, all these CSS rules will get applied. And then you may have maybe another one between 768 and 992, and you may have another one between 992 and 1200, and maybe you may have one for 1200 and higher, right? So depending on how many breakpoints you've decided on for your website, you can set up these min and max conditions, and then you can write completely separate rules for each of these. Okay. So this is one way you can go about doing things, but a slightly better way is what is called mobile first design. So the way you should be building most web pages today is by starting out with a mobile design. So first you should just design your web page or build your web page for mobile, and then slowly enhance that same web page to make it look good on a tablet and on a desktop screen, and maybe on a large desktop screen as well, right? So in a mobile first design, the base CSS styles are for mobile devices. So you do not have a media query for the mobile devices. You just write all the base CSS styles and apply that to mobile devices. And then media queries are used to progressively enhance the design for larger screens, right? So what you're basically trying to do is you're going to implement this design first, and then slowly you are going to add a breakpoint, and then at a certain breakpoint you're going to maybe change this layout and maybe shift to a 2-column layout. And then slowly you're going to add another breakpoint, and at that particular breakpoint you're going to add a bunch of these categories, and you're going to shift to a 3-column layout, and so on. All right. So that is what we're going to do. We are going to start with the base styles, and then you can have whatever new styles you want to introduce for tablets. You can simply say media screen and min width 576. So you're telling the browser only for screens with more than 576 pixels, apply these new CSS rules. And some of these CSS rules will override the old CSS rules that have been set in the base styles. So that's how media queries are more selective, so they can override the existing styles. And then we have similarly these a next set of rules, min width 768, and these rules are going to override the rules that have been created in these and these. So they also follow the order and they follow the specificity. That is how CSS works. So all these rules are going to override the previous rules that you have set. And then you can similarly have maybe another where you can say media screen and min width 992. So only when the screen width crosses 992, these new rules will get applied, only a selective set of rules, and they will override any rules that have been previously applied. Okay. This way you don't have to repeat a lot of CSS for every screen. Rather, you can start with the mobile design and you can just add a few properties here and there to make the website look nicer on tablet. And this is a great approach because if you start out with the desktop layout and you try to compress it down to mobile, you're going to face a lot of difficulty. Rather, if you start out with the mobile layout, often the tablet and desktop layout will simply either have more information or rearrange some of the things into multiple columns, and that is easier to achieve rather than taking more information and compressing it down into one column. Okay? So even as a designer, you should always start from the mobile layout and then slowly build out the desktop. So by removing the max width condition for the first breakpoint and using only min width queries for the rest, we ensure that the base styles apply to mobile devices only, and then they apply to all devices further as well. But progressively, we also enhance the design as the screen size increases. Okay. So try experimenting with this. Try setting up some of these breakpoints in the CSS file and experimenting with this to make changes to the Jovian Careers website, make it more responsive. Now observe how the mobile first approach is different from the previous approach where you have different set of styles between each set of breakpoints. Okay. All right. So one other thing we need to cover before we go ahead and actually implement the mobile design is something called the CSS Flexbox layout. Because it's not just that you're going to change the layout at certain breakpoints. Between those breakpoints as well, sometimes you will have to make the layout a little more fluid so that things go from maybe 2 columns to 3 columns, or maybe the sizes of things increase and decrease, and maybe you add space on the left and right. So to handle these kind of fluid layouts, CSS has something called Flexbox. And this is something that was added to CSS about 15 years ago, about 12 years ago to be exact. So this is something that was added to CSS about 12 or 13 years ago, when mobile layouts became more common, when mobile phones became more common, to allow for creating fluid layouts that can be flexible and that can grow and that can automatically shift into multiple columns, etc. as required. Okay. So we're going to look at the CSS Flexbox setup. We're going to learn a little bit about Flexbox. It's not a detailed Flexbox tutorial. We're going to learn the most common Flexbox properties. And it is a versatile method for arranging elements within a container in a flexible and adaptive manner. And it simplifies complex layouts, making it easy to achieve responsive designs and accommodate varying content sizes. Now, the Flexbox layout can be applied to an HTML element by modifying the CSS display property. And it was added to CSS in 2010, and it was implemented by most browsers in the early 2010s. And the CSS display property, this is something that we've already seen here. It determines how an element is displayed on a web page. So just to give you an example, I am going to first just create a new file called display.html. And in this file display.html, I am going to create a bunch of divs. So let me just put in body, and in the body, let me put in a bunch of divs. Let's create a div called item1, item2, item3, and item4. Okay. And let us open up this page using the live server. So let us right click and say open with live server. And we'll open it up here. Right. The way to open up any page in live server is by simply right clicking and selecting open with live server. Okay. And you can see that we have a bunch of these divs here. And I'm just going to set the display property for each of these divs. So first, I am going to set the display property for item 1. So let me just give it the ID item 1. And let me give this the ID item 2. Let's go ahead and give them item 3 and item 4. Yeah. So you have a bunch of items here, and let us go ahead and set the display property for item 1 to display block. Okay. And let's put that inside a style tag. So that is how we are applying CSS. So there is no change when we set the display of item 1 to display block. What happens if we change the display of item 1 to display inline? Let's actually add a border around item 1 so that we can get a better sense. Yeah, you can see here that when you have display block, which is the default value, item 1 takes up the entire width of the screen. Instead, if we set display inline, you can see that now item 1 does not take up the entire width of the screen, and in fact, it will show up in line with other things that are also in line. So let me just go ahead and for item 2 as well, let me add a border 1px solid red, and let me set the display to inline as well. Okay, and you can see here that item 1 and item 2 both show up on the same line because they are set to inline. So display inline does not take up the entire width and allows a particular div to get embedded inline within some text or within other inline items. But if either of these was block, you can see that that no longer is true. All right. So that is display inline. And then there is something called display inline block, which I will leave to you as an exercise. So I'll let you figure that out, what that does and how that's different from display inline. Then there is something called display none. I can say item 2 or item 3, display none. Now it just disappears. So when you don't want to show a particular div, and we'll see an example of this later today, then you just set display none. Now the final property that we are going to study, which is what triggers the Flexbox layout, is the display flex property. Okay, so we're going to come back and we're going to take a closer look at the display flex property, which is what makes a particular div a flex container and allows its children to be laid out as flexible boxes. Okay, very important. We're going to look at that in just a second. But there are also several other display options, so I encourage you to check out the other display options as well. And I encourage you to also maybe try out this exercise, which goes into the various options that you have for the display property. But these are the most common ones that you'll use: display block, inline, flex, and possibly none. Okay. So with that, let's close this. Let us talk about Flexbox. Now, the first key thing you want to understand about the Flexbox layout is that it works with containers and items. So you always have an outer div, which is a parent or a container, on which you set the display flex property. And then you have the items, and the items are then laid out in a flexible fashion based on a bunch of CSS properties that you set. Okay. So the display flex property, when applied to a container or a parent component, causes the items or children to be arranged using the CSS Flexbox layout. And the arrangement can be controlled using various container level and child level properties, as we will discuss in just a sec. So let's go ahead and create a new file called flexbox.html. I'm going to right click here and create a new file called flexbox.html. Into this file, flexbox.html, I'm going to add a bunch of HTML and CSS code to set things up. Let me also open it up quickly in the live preview. So open with live server. Let us open it up over here. And let us come back and let us set up the code for this. So I'm just going to copy this code and paste it in here, and we'll just walk through the code and then start studying a bunch of. Okay. So this is what our content currently looks like. We have a box. So we have a div with the ID container over here. And then inside that div, we have 4 divs, one called item 1, another called item 2, another called item 3, and another called item 4. So we have this container div, that's clear. The container div has 4 item divs, and each item div has the ID item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4 respectively. And all of the item divs have the class item. Okay. And let us look at the CSS. So far we've not used Flexbox at all. For the container, we have set a background color of coral. You can see that it has this orangish background color. And then we've also given it a background, 1 pixel solid black background, a border of 1 pixel solid black. We have also just set a font family so that the text is a little easier to read. And finally, we have given it a padding of 10 pixels. So you can see that there is a 10 pixel padding inside the border, and then there is a content inside it. Okay. So far, we've not modified the display property. Then we have the item for each item. And again, this is the class item, not individual items. So we have specified the class item for each item. We're not using the IDs just yet. We have again set a border of 1 pixel. We have set a padding, so you can see that there is some space around the text. And finally, we've set a background of cornflower blue. That is the blue that you are seeing. Now let us slowly start turning this into a flex container. So always the flex display property is set on the container. Okay, so we say display flex. And I'm going to hit save. And now you can see suddenly that all the items are now laid out in a horizontal fashion. Okay, so you set the display property on the container. On the container, you set the display property, and that causes the items to be laid out according to the settings, the default settings of a Flexbox. Okay. So the first thing that we can change is the direction in which things are laid out, and that is done using the flex direction property. And the flex direction property has 4 values. It has the row value, it has the row reverse value, it has the column value, and the column reverse value. Okay. So let us take a look. Again, all of these properties are first set on the container, and for each property, we also have an example of whether it is set on the parent, which is the container, or the child. So flex direction is specified in the parent. So we say flex direction row, and that doesn't change anything because the flex direction row is the default value. But we could also say flex direction row reverse. And now you can see that the items are laid out not from left to right, but from right to left. So you have item 1, item 2, item 3, and item 4 laid out from right to left. Okay. They're still, logically, they're still in this order, but they're just laid out from right to left. And this is where you can use Flexbox to maybe do some right to left layouts. Okay, let's check flex direction column. Okay. Flex direction column, as you might expect, lays things out in a columnar format, which is pretty similar to display block, but except you are setting that this is a column on the parent and on the container, not on individual items. Okay. So flex, and of course you'll be able to set a lot of other properties as well. So this is flex direction column, and let me just increase the height of this so that I can show you clearly that the way things stack up is at the top. Okay, so flex direction column is top to bottom. You can also do flex direction column reverse, and that will send things from the bottom to top. You can see item 1, above that item 2, item 3, and item 4. So that is how you can lay things out. Flex direction row is left to right. Flex direction row reverse is right to left. Column is top to bottom. Reverse, column reverses bottom to top. Okay. These are the 4 values you can set for the flex direction property. And with Flexbox specifically, I would highly recommend that you practice this, that you check out if you have a question, what happens if I do X, then just go ahead and try it out and maybe set proper heights and widths. You can use the starting code that we've provided here and experiment and understand and improve your understanding. Okay. All right. So that's fine. Now, the next thing is to check what happens if you have maybe data that is not going to fix within the given width of the container. So now we have a container, and now for this container we have a bunch of items, and all these items seem to be fitting just fine. Well, what happens if we had more items? Let's say if we had item 567, right? So item 567, clearly you can see what happens is first, they try to compress to fit within, but if they cannot go beyond a particular width, then they just go out, then they just fall out. Now, when they do fall out, what do you do? Another condition that could come up here is, let's say our left and right padding was actually higher. It specified a 30 pixel padding left and right. What are you going to do here? Now, these all seem to be overflowing. These all seem to be going outside the box here. And that is where you can specify a flex wrap property. So you can say flex wrap, and the default value is no wrap. And again, this has to be set on the parent, and it specifies whether whether the children should be wrapped, which means they should go on the next line or not. No wrap simply means that you want everything to show up on the same line, even if it exceeds the width of the container. The other option is to say wrap, in which case, this is what happens. It takes item 1, 2, 3, and then as soon as it finds a child element that cannot fit without exceeding the width of the container, it wraps onto the next line. So we have 5, 6, 7. You can also do wrap reverse. And the idea here is that it wraps not onto the next line, but onto the previous line. So you can say 1, 2, 3, and then it goes 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay. And notice this is different from row reverse. So if you did row reverse, and you can check this out, it would now go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. So keep that in mind, that you have a reversal on the row level, you have a reversal possibly on the column level, and then you can do that reversal on the wrap level as well, whether you want the lines to go up or you want the lines to go down. Okay. So that is the flex wrap property. So you can, of course, just use no wrap, which is what just uses this. And then you have wrap and wrap reverse. You can experiment with this and you'll get a better understanding. Now, the next set of properties, which are around justification and alignment, determine how flex items are positioned within a container. So these options provide control over the distribution of items along the main axis. So the main axis, let's say if it is a flex row, then the main axis is the horizontal axis, and the secondary axis is the vertical axis. But if the flex direction is column, then the main axis is a vertical axis and the secondary axis is a horizontal axis. Okay. So we'll just talk about it. It's also called the cross axis. So justification is controlled along the main axis. That is done using something called justify content. And then alignment around is controlled along the cross axis. Okay. And I know this seems confusing. This is probably the most confusing part of Flexbox, but with some practice, you'll get used to it. Let's look at justify content. Now, here is how justify content works. Let's say you have a flex container with flex direction row. And on that container, if you set justify content to flex start, then things will simply show up from left to right. Okay. If you set justify content to center, then the items will still show left to right, but they will be centered on the horizontal axis or on the main axis, right? So what that means is that all the items will be shown and then space will be added on the left and right. On the other hand, if you set flex end as justify content, then the items will just stick to the right. You notice they're still rendered left to right, 1, 2, 3, but they are now sticking to the right side instead of the left side. And similarly, we have a bunch of other options as well. So let's take a look. Let's get rid of some of these other items. So let's get rid of item 4, 5, and 4, 5, 6, and 7. Or just let's get rid of items 5, 6, and 7. So I'm just commenting them out. And let us reduce the padding, the horizontal padding for each item. So this is how they look right now. Now I can get rid of the wrapping for now as well. Now let me just add justify content. And again, it's on the parent. And let me say flex start. That's where they are. They are currently sticking to the start, which is the left, right? It's not saying left, it's saying start, because if I had row reverse, then they would stick to the right. And if I had column, they would stick to the top. So it's just start at start of the axis, whatever be the main axis. Okay. And now I could say justify content center. And now you can see that they're still laid out left to right, but now they are placed at the center. And as I change the width of the screen, you can see that they still remain right in the center. So anytime you want to horizontally center content within the page, just put an outer div, give it the display flex, and then put in an inner div, and give the outer div justify content center, and that is going to horizontally center a bunch of content on the page. Very straightforward. Okay. Next, let us now do justify content flex end. Now you can see that they are laid out at the end. So I modify. Then there's another thing you can use. You can use space between. Now what space between does is there is of course this padding. For now, let me just get rid of this padding so that we can have a better understanding of the space. So when you use space between, then space is added between each item and they are laid out from the left to the right with equal space between them. You can see here that as I change the size of the page, space is added or removed between and all space is equal. Okay. Then you have space around. Now space around is similar to space between, but what you do is you take half of the space between and then you add it on the left and the right end as well. Okay. So that is what space around looks like. You can see visually that this space is about half of this space. And that is why I removed the padding for now, just so that we could clearly see these effects. Finally, there is something called space evenly. Okay. Now space evenly, as you can guess, what it's doing is it's going to add the same amount of space on the left edge, on the right edge, and between items. So slight differences between, space around, and space evenly. Depending on the use case, you can use one of these or just do something else altogether. Okay. But for now, let me bring that back to flex start. And we can also see this effect on a flex direction column. So let's say we have the direction column and let's say we have a height of 250 px here. You can see that these are now laid out from the top. I can do flex end. Of course, I can then do flex center. They are now centered. So now the main axis is the vertical axis. And in fact, it starts from the top. So the start is the top, end is the bottom. And I can do things like space around, space between as well. So this is space between. That is flex direction column. So all of these properties work for flex direction row and column. Okay, get rid of that height. All right, so that is justify content, flex start, center, end, space around, space between, and space evenly. And the same thing works for the column as well. When you have a flex direction column, this is how the justify content values look. Very powerful property. You will be using this a lot to create more complex layouts. Then we have align items. So justify content was along the main axis. So for flex row, it was along the horizontal axis. For flex column, it's along the vertical axis. Align items is used to align things along the cross axis. Okay. So here is what that means. Let's say you have align items on, you're setting align items on a parent where the flex direction is row. Let's look at an example of this. Let's just see this live. Let's set the height to 250 pixels again. Okay, so the flex direction is row and I want to set the align items property. The default value is stretch. And you can see that as I increase the height of this div from whatever was the default height to 250 pixels, everything stretched. All of these inner divs, all of these child divs, they automatically stretch to take up the full height or the full space along the cross axis, which is the vertical axis, because the main axis is the horizontal axis. But I could also do flex start. So align items flex start. So now along the cross axis or along the vertical axis, things are sticking to the start. Okay. So in the cross axis, this is the start and this is the end. So things are sticking to the start. I could also maybe just stick them to the end. So I can just say flex end. And now they are sticking to the bottom, which is again the main axis or the primary axis is horizontal. So along the cross axis, top to bottom, they're at the bottom or at the end. I can also align items center, of course, and in which case they are centered here along the cross axis. And notice how this is different from justify content center, which is going to center them along the primary axis or the main axis, right? So here is another trick. If you just set align item center and justify content center, then your content is centered vertically and horizontally on the page. And as you increase or decrease the height, it is going to be centered vertically and it is going to be centered horizontally as well. So let's say if this was 300 pixels, it would still be centered vertically. If this was 150 pixels, it would still be centered vertically. So vertical centering can be achieved by using flex direction row and align item center, or by using flex direction column and justify content center. So there are both ways to achieve it. But that is how align items and justify content play. Justify content plays along the main axis, align items plays along the cross axis. What other options do we have for align items? Well, we have flex start, flex end, center. We looked at stretch, which is the default value. That there is also another specific align items property called baseline, which looks quite similar to start, but here's the difference. What this does is this aligns the baseline of the text for each of the divs. So if I were to go in, let's say if I were to go in into item 1 and change the font size to 10 pixels, and if I were to go in into item 3 and change the font size to 30 pixels, this is what the content would look like. So notice what's happening here. Because align items is set to baseline, the line that runs through the bottom of each line of text aligns perfectly. Now this is very different from doing align items text start, which is going to just align things right at the very top, or even doing something like align item center, which is going to just align the centers of the items and not the baselines. So the very special case, you might not always need this, but you can align by the baseline if you need to, if you have text of various sizes in a bunch of flex items. Okay, so those are all the ways in which you can use align items, and let us revert that for now. And of course, all of this works on flex direction column as well. So here we have flex direction column. Let us increase this height to 250 px. Okay, so here is flex direction column. So now the primary or the main axis is along the bottom, along top to bottom. So the cross axis is left to right. And now I could say flex start to align things on the left. And by default, of course, the value is stretch to align things to take up the entire space on the cross axis. And of course, I could also have align items center, in which case they will be horizontally centered this time because the cross axis is the horizontal axis, and vertically they're still right at the beginning. So remember that for justify content, the default value is flex start, which is right at the beginning. But for align items, the default value is stretch, which is to take up the entire space along the cross axis. Of course, I can do flex end here as well. Okay, now along the cross axis or the horizontal axis, they show up on the right. Let's revert that. So that was align items. Okay. So on this is what it works on row. This is how it works on column. I know it's starting to get confusing. Practice, and that is how you'll get it. And of course, you can always come back and refer to it. You don't have to remember all of this perfectly. Okay, just remember justify content is along the main axis, align items is along the cross axis. Now you also have this special property called align self, which can be used to change the alignment of along the cross axis of just a particular child. Okay, so now we are looking at certain child level properties, not the parent level properties. So let's increase the height here once again, height 250 pixels, and by default everything has align stretch. And let me just go in here and let me just set this to align item center for now. So by default, all the items are aligned along the center. And let me go in here into item 1. And for item 1, let me just set align self. So item 1 just by itself should be aligned to the start. So flex start. Now align items, item 1 goes right to the top at flex start. And I can then align maybe item 2 align self to flex end. Now I'm pushing item 2 right to the very end of the cross axis. Remember, we're still on the flex direction row. So the main axis is row, the cross axis is top to bottom. And we can of course go ahead and for item 3, we can use line self stretch. And now item 3 is stretching. And item 4 can be aligned separately as well. So you can have a global setting for align items, and then you can override it using align self for each item as you need. Of course, this works not just for column, not just for row, but also for column. So here now what's happening is that we have this, let me just get rid of the default, get rid of all these for now. So now we have the column as the main axis. So along the horizontal axis, we have set to align items center. That's why they're all centered. Then if we change the setting for item 1, you can see that item 1 goes to the left because we are setting it to flex start. Item 2 goes to the right because we are setting it to flex end. So along the cross axis, which is left to right, it is going on the right. Item 3 is stretching and item 4 is in the center, which is the default setting that has been put in for the container. Okay, so you can set a property for the container and then you can override it for these individual items. Now that makes sense for align items, doesn't make sense for justify content, and I'll let you think about why. Okay, for now, let's get rid of this. And let us just go back here to flex direction row. Okay, so that is align self. You can use flex start or you can use flex end to move it to the end of the cross axis. You can center it in the cross axis or even stretch it or even align it to the baseline. You have all these options available to you. Okay. Next up, there are also a couple of adjacent properties called align content and justify items. I will not cover them here because they are not very commonly used. I have almost never used them, maybe once or twice, but they are slightly different from align items and justify content. So I will let you explore these on your own. So check out the properties justify items and align content. As you can imagine, they might do alignment along the main axis and justification along the cross axis. So you have those options as well. And look up some tutorials to understand how they differ from justify content and align items. Or if you don't want to get confused right now, just skip these altogether and just use the default justify content along the main axis and align items along the cross axis. But if you want to, you can experiment. Okay. So those are some justification and alignment properties. So in most cases, you will be working with flex direction. You will be working with flex wrap. You'll be working with the align items and justify content properties. And sometimes you will use the align self property on a particular child. But then there are also certain flex properties that you can set on children specifically to control how the various children take up space on the page. Okay. And we're going to look at all of these properties. They're called flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. And then we're going to look at a shorthand property so that you never actually have to use all of these separate properties, but it's useful to understand what they mean. Okay. So the first property is the flex grow property. Now notice over here, if I get rid of the height, notice that these divs are not taking up the entire space available. Right? These, and let me just have 3 divs for now. Let's get rid of the 4th div as well. Yeah, so notice that these divs are not taking up the entire width on the page. Now, sometimes you might want in maybe some kind of a sidebar layout where you have a left sidebar, right sidebar, and the middle item should grow to take up as much space as possible. In such cases, you can use the flex grow property. So when you have some free space, you can specify a flex grow property, and by default, its value is set to 0, which means that you don't want you don't want one of the children to grow by default. You only want each of the children to take up as much space as is required to display all of its children. Okay, so for example, right now to show item 1, this is the only amount of space that is required. But if let's say the text here was item 1, it would take up twice the space to show the content, right? However, if let's say I wanted item 2 to take up all the space in between and item 3 to shift completely to the right, then I could do something like this. I could say for item 2, I could say item 2, flex grow 1. Now what I'm saying is that item 2 should take up how much ever space is available in between. And you can specify any positive number here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll talk about what they mean. But as soon as you specify something other than 0, item 2 starts to grow to take up the available space. Okay. Now, let's say I wanted to do something slightly more complex. Let's say what I wanted to do was item 1 should take up maybe 30% of the space. Item 3 should take up 30% of the space, and item 2 should take up 40% of the space. So it should always be, if there is additional space available, it should go 30, 40, 30. Okay. And let's see how to do that. So the way I would do that is simply by specifying those proportions for each item. So for item 1, let us say flex grow to be 3, and these are proportions, so that's why I don't necessarily need to write 30, 40, 30. These are not percentages. And item 3 will also be flex grow. Now you can see this layout 3, 4, 3, and maybe just to make it a little more pronounced, you can look at maybe 2, 6, 2. You can see that 20% of the space is taken up by item. Yeah, 20% of the space is taken up by item 1, 20% by item 3, and you can see that item 2 takes up about 60%. Okay. You can also do something like 1, 1, 4. They don't have to add up to 10 or 100 or anything. It's just that now you can see that out of the additional space that is available, 10% of the space is taken by item 1, 10% by item 3, and the rest is taken by item 2. Okay. So what you're specifying is among the available additional space, how much space should be taken up by each item, how much additional space. So these are not exactly in that proportion. These are actually not exactly 1:4:1 because the base size is not affected. And that is where we'll talk about flex basis slightly down the line. Okay. But grow tells flex grow determines a flex item's ability to grow relative to other items within a flex container, allowing it to expand and take up the available space. So what you can do is you can say that out of all the additional space, how should that space be distributed to each item? And by default, it is 0. So by default, the additional space does not go to any item. And as you start setting values for each item, then by those proportions, the space is distributed. Okay. So that is flex grow. Next up, we have something called flex shrink. Okay. Now, just as we have flex grow, we have the flex shrink property, and the flex shrink property determines a flex item's ability to shrink relative to other items within the flex container, allowing it to contract and fit the available space. So here is how it works. Let me get rid of flex grow settings for now. Let's just disable this, this. Okay, so now let's say we had too much content here and we had to actually shrink things. How can I do that? Well, let me just add a bunch of space here. Okay, so now there is more space here, and you can see that the text is wrapping onto the next line. But if we wanted to shrink things a little bit, then we would have to go in and set the shrink property. Let me set here flex shrink, and by default things shrink automatically. So this is the default value. So you can see that they have shrunk a little bit. Ideally they should have been like this, but they have shrunk a little bit. They have shrunk a little bit because the text has come onto the next line. So there is definitely some shrinking that has happened. Right? So shrinking is happening by default, and they're going to shrink to their base size, and they're not going to shrink beyond the base size by default. But in case I set flex shrink to 1 for one of them, and then I set flex shrink to 0, for the others, so I've set flex shrink to 1 and flex shrink to 0, you can now see that as I shrink it, item 1 shrinks which is the default, it tries to shrink. So till it can no longer shrink, till there is no, till the space of its children is completely taken up. But item 2 and item 3 don't shrink because the shrinking is constant. That's what happens. And of course, you can then shrink in proportions as well. So let's say you set it up in such a way that each of these are taking up some additional space. You have original size here. And you're then going to try to shrink them in a certain proportion. So item 1 is going to shrink in a certain proportion. Item 3 is going to shrink in a certain proportion. This will be clearer if we have more content here. So let me just put some more content so that each of these can shrink independently. Okay. Now you can see that item 1 has shrunk significantly, whereas item 2 and item 3 have not shrunk at all. But let's say we want the shrinkage to happen in a certain proportion. So then we could say that, okay, item 1 should shrink in the proportion of 1. Item 2 should shrink in the proportion of 3. So it should shrink 3x. And item 3 should also shrink proportion 1, right? You can now see that right now item 2 is shrinking the most, whereas item 1 and item 3 are shrinking the least. So what we are saying here is that the decrease in size has to be distributed in the ratio 1:3:1 for the specific columns. Okay, so that is flex shrink. And then the final property is flex basis. Now the flex basis property decides what is the initial main size of a flex item before any available space is distributed. And by default, the flex basis is set to auto, which means that the initial main size of each child is determined by the item's own width and height, which is basically the width and height of its content, if it is not set. Okay. However, you can also say that the basis or the main size of a particular item is 0. So let's see what happens when we do that. Let us set flex basis to 0 for all of these. Okay. Now, when we set the flex basis to 0, what we are saying is that there is no basic size. You can keep reducing the size and well, I guess it's 1 probably. Yeah. So by default, flex basis is set to auto, which means it takes up its default size. And then flex basis of 0 says that there is no basis size and it can shrink as much as possible. So in this case, you can see that item 1, 2, 3 are all shrinking as much as possible because we've not set a basis size. So the basis size is just as low as possible, right? So by default, there's no shrink. It is not going to take up any additional space than the minimum necessary space. On the other hand, and when flex basis is 0, shrink doesn't really make sense. On the other hand, we can add flex grow. And now what we're saying is that they can grow to take up the additional space in the specified criteria. So 1:4:4 to take up whatever additional space is available beyond the very basic minimum space. Okay. So the interplay of flex basis, flex shrink and flex grow is what decides what happens in the default state, what happens when you have more space available, what happens when you have less space available. Okay. But however, most of the time you don't actually use these 3 properties. You just use a basic value, or you just use a simple shorthand property called flex. Okay. So here's what you can do. Instead of saying flex grow, flex basis, flex shrink, etc. Let's say I want the ratios to be 2, 4, and 4, at least the ratio of the additional space and the shrinkage. And I can just specify something like this: flex 2, flex 4, and flex 2. And now things are automatically scaling as I expect. So there is the base size that still applies, the very basic minimum base size. So when you do flex 2, flex 4, flex 2, what that means is you're saying that the flex grow value is 2, the flex shrink value is 2, and then the flex value is, or the flex basis value is 0, okay, or the minimum possible space. So normally you'll just end up doing this flex 2, flex 4, and flex 2, or setting some kind of a proportion between these flex items. And that is how you'll use it. But you have a bunch of different ways to use the syntax. You can just set a single initial value. You can set it to auto. You can set it to none, which will just use 0 0 for 0 0 for each. And you can just use a single value, one value syntax like flex1, which is going to set it to 1 1 0. Or you can use a two value syntax, which is going to set it to 1 1, and then maybe a specific base size, a fixed base size. Or you can use a three value syntax, which is going to use a certain percentage base size as well. So you have a bunch of ways to set the flex property. Okay. The most common use case of the flex property is something that I want to show you, because flex, grow, basis, and shrink, I almost never use them because layouts are never that complicated that you need to use all these properties. But the most common layout that I use is that one of these needs to take up all the additional space and the rest of them do not need to take up the additional space. So in that case, I would do something like this. I would just go in, let me just reduce the content a little bit. Yeah. And let me reduce the padding here a little bit as well. Yeah. So the most common use of the flex property, which is the flex, grow, shrink, and basis property, is this. You want item 2 to take up all the space in between, no matter what the screen width is. So I would just go into item 2 and I would say flex 1. And just by doing that, just by setting flex 1, item 2 takes up all the space in between. Not just horizontally, but this can happen vertically as well. So let's say we have display flex and flex direction column. And we have a height of 150 px, or let's make that 250 px. Yeah. So you can see here, now we are taking up all the available space in this direction. All right. And similarly, one other use case you might have is that I want item 1 and item 2 to always have the same width. So let me just go back to flex direction row and let me just set item 1, flex 1. Let me just set this to flex 5 or something like a very high value. And item 3. Okay. Now you can see here that more or less item 1, item 3 are going to have similar widths. And we don't necessarily have to achieve it by setting these flex values. We can also just do these in this way. We can just say width 20% and width 60% and width 30%. Okay. So this is the actual real use case of the flex property, or why we use Flexbox, because we want to achieve a certain set of widths. This may be our main content, this may be our left content, this may be our right content. Now all of that, of course, when we're using the flex property, under the hood, it's using flex basis, flex grow, flex shrink and all that. But I just use the flex property directly. Okay. So experiment with the various options for flex grow, flex shrink, flex basis, but don't stress if they don't make a lot of sense, because there are certain edge cases, certain special scenarios which you may not be able to keep in your head. You can always just look them up. The key is maybe just to use the flex property and try to get what you want. And the most common use case is either setting flex 1 to expand a certain div to take up all space, or using flex 1 on a couple of divs to maybe make them roughly equal width. Okay. Now, Flexbox has many applications in all kinds of web design. As you can see for the New York Times website, this kind of a layout is achieved and made responsive only using Flexbox. It is used to create responsive layouts. It is used to create certain grid systems as well. There's a separate layout called the grid layout, which we have not covered today. We'll maybe try and cover at some point. It is used to create equal height columns. Let's say you want to have maybe a bunch of cards showing side by side. All of those cards should have equal height. That is something that you can create using Flexbox. It is used to perform vertical centering. Let's say you want to center a div vertically on the page or vertically inside another div. The way you do it is simply by setting flex direction columns, justify content center, or flex direction row, align item center. It is used for reordering elements. Sometimes on mobile, you want a left to right, a certain layout, and on desktop, you want a reversed layout. So that's what you can use it for. It is used for maybe showing image and text side by side. It is used for creating responsive forms. Let's say you have a form where you have a first name, last name. An example of this can be seen on the Jovian website. So you can see that first name and last name are side by side. And then again, you have email, and then we have phone number, and you have the country code and phone number side by side. And then you have again the program. So all of this is achieved using Flexbox. And it is used for ensuring spacing and alignment, making sure that something takes up the entire space, making sure that two divs are the same size. And there are many tutorials you can go through. The more practice you get with Flexbox, the better you will get at it. Specifically, I would highly recommend the series of screencasts by Wes Boss called What the Flexbox. It goes into each Flex property and then it shows you a bunch of specific scenarios as well. And I would also highly recommend you to check out 30 Days of Flexbox, which is again a series of tutorials that you can follow along day by day. And there is, just for reference, there is this complete guide to Flexbox that you can always check out. This contains a bunch of visuals and it contains information about each property so that you don't have to remember this. I always look this up. I never remember this even after using this for probably 10 plus years at this point. Okay. So it takes a while to get used to thinking in Flexbox, but once you do, you can build pretty much any layout that you can imagine, right? So the last thing I'll say about Flexbox is that it's powerful, but because it is so powerful, it is also somewhat confusing. It takes a while to get used to it, but don't give up. Don't run away from Flexbox. Just limit your usage to basic flex direction, flex wrap, and align items and justify content, and maybe every now and then use the flex property. So let's now go ahead and redesign the Jovian careers site. So this is what it looks like on desktop. I think it looks fine on desktop for now. We don't need to really redesign anything here, but we do want to redesign it on mobile because on mobile it definitely doesn't look good at all. So we want to do something with the mobile design, and we are going to follow these steps. First, we're going to create a separate branch on our code space. Remember, we don't want to affect the main site when we are making changes, when we are experimenting. So we're going to create a separate branch and test our changes there without affecting the main site. Then we are going to create separate wireframes for mobile and desktop screens. Then we are going to set up base styles and media queries for a mobile first design. Then we are going to implement each section first for mobile and then for desktop. Then we are going to test each section at various widths and make required adjustments. And finally, we are going to create a pull request. We're going to review that pull request, review the preview deployment, and then merge it back to the main site. Okay. So our main site, which is Jovian Careers Responsive live.vercel.app. This is going to remain unchanged till we merge our pull request, right? So this is what the common practice is, that you have the main site that is running, then you create a branch, work on your feature. And once the feature is reviewed and tested and merged back, then this will automatically get updated because Vercel will do an automatic deployment for it. Okay? So this is our main site. We're not going to affect that. But this is our preview site, which we are looking at here. Let us just open up index.html. Open with live server. Put that in here. So this is a preview site. Let me just set it to a default width. So this is what it looks like on desktop. This is 100% width. Let me just open the same page up in a couple of other browsers as well. And I'm just going to select different devices in each case. So here I want to study its width on the tablet. Let's say maybe a tablet would be about 700 pixels. Raise the width a little bit here. Yeah. So about 750 pixels, I believe, would be a tablet layout. And let us also create a mobile layout here. So we're going to look at a mobile layout as well. So let's maybe design around 300 and maybe around 400 pixels. That is what most mobile layouts are around. Okay. Now we have, for our code space, for our index.html, which is running using the live server extension. So this is all the preview of what we are doing on our code space. We have the mobile layout here. We have the tablet layout here, and we have the desktop layout here. And we're going to start with the mobile layout. We're going to do a mobile first design, and then we're going to slowly improve that layout to account for tablet and desktop as well. Okay. So we're going to use these breakpoints. Under 576 pixels is going to be our mobile layout. So this is about 400. That's mobile. Under 768 pixels and above 576 is going to be a tablet layout. I believe we've set this to about, yeah, we've set this to about 7. Let's set it to about 740. Yeah, so that's in the tablet range, and we can always go left and right and we can shift things. And greater than 768 pixels is going to be a desktop layout, which is what this is. And of course, we can also then consider large desktops, etc. For now, I'm simply not considering those. Okay, so let's get started step by step, slowly. And before we proceed, I would encourage you, as you're reviewing this, to pause, take a few minutes to think about how you would design the mobile version of the Jovian career site, and take inspiration from the examples that we looked at earlier, and maybe try to create a wireframe for the mobile version of the site on pen and paper or using a digital whiteboard like excalibur.com. But here is a wireframe that we are going to be using. Now, typically, a design mockup that is given to you is going to be given for mobile, tablet, and desktop. Similarly, we can try creating wireframes for mobile, tablet, and desktop. But just to keep things simple, we are just going to create a mobile wireframe and a desktop wireframe. Excuse me. We're going to keep things simple, use a mobile wireframe and a desktop wireframe. And for tablet, we will just approximate and maybe pick some elements from the mobile and some elements from the desktop. Okay. So for the desktop view, we are going to use the same layout that we had earlier. So which is the Jovian logo here at the top with the Jovian text, then an image here, the About Jovian section, the job opportunities table, and the submit your application form. And then there is a footer at the bottom with a bunch of options, courses, programs, and YouTube. For mobile, here is what we are going to do. We are going to use a navbar, but in the navbar, we're not going to show the entire Jovian logo. We're just going to show the Jovian icon. Okay, this is a common practice on mobile that you often just show the icon. So I'll just show you an example of this. Let's say I go to jovian.com/learn, zoom in here a little bit. And if I go into the mobile view here, you can see that at this point, we only show the icon because we often have a bunch of things on the right as well. This is the profile icon, which also happens to be the Jovian logo. But yeah, we only show the icon on the mobile. And we also maybe change the layout slightly on mobile, as you can see on the Jovian platform as well. Okay. So on mobile, we're going to show the icon. We are going to show the image, but we're probably going to reduce its height a little bit, not to ensure that not to take up the entire page. Otherwise, it might just take up a lot of space. Then we are going to have this About Jovian section where we're going to have this description, and we are going to move the image below. Right? So the image is going to remain below, and I think I'll use the same layout for tablet as well. Then we are going to have job opportunities, but this time for job opportunities, we are going to use a list or maybe a bunch of divs. So we are going to show these cards instead of actually showing a table, because on mobile, viewing a table doesn't make sense. But on desktop, we're still going to use a table. So we're going to see how to achieve that. Then we have this layout for application. So on mobile, it's a nice idea to maybe just make all your inputs full width. So just let them occupy the full width of the screen. And we have this upload resume cover letter button as well. And finally, for the footer, we are simply going to show the options one below the other. Unlike on desktop, we are going to show the options side by side. Okay. And we'll decide how to change these layouts for tablet as well. But these are the two layouts that we are working with. Okay. And specifically, the job opportunities table is going to be the real challenge because it doesn't have a table layout on mobile. It has a list of cards. And I encourage you to go ahead and replicate these wireframes on your own. Wireframing is a very useful skill for a web developer. Before you can go in and start coding the website, you should have a very clear idea of how it's going to look, at the very least using these rough wireframes. And as I've said before, we are going to follow a mobile first design, which means we're going to first set up CSS styles for mobile section by section. And then we are going to enhance the CSS styles for tablet and for desktop and maybe even for smaller, for larger screens. Okay. So for that, here is how we can begin. We can begin by commenting out all the existing CSS and just rebuild the page right from scratch. and we'll just put in a bunch of media queries at the beginning. Okay, so first let's comment out all the CSS. Let us open up styles.css here. Let us comment out all the CSS. The way we'll do it is by adding this star slash star at the top and then adding a star slash at the bottom. Okay, so you added slash star at the top and star slash at the bottom. And now if we reload our pages, we can see that all the CSS is gone, completely gone, right? So we have no styles. We're starting from scratch, same content, but no CSS. This one image is looking really big, so I'm just going to give this image a height explicitly in my index.html file. I'm going to go into this index.html file and I'm going to scroll down and find this image, the team image, and I'm just going to give it a height of 100, just so that it doesn't mess up the entire page when I'm setting things up. All right, so now we are more or less ready to begin. We have this mobile layout, top to bottom content, we have this tablet layout, and we have this desktop layout. All right, now let us first just bring in our media queries that we are going to use for each layout. Now the base styles, because we're using a mobile first layout, the base styles are just going to be added right at the top without any media query. They're going to apply to all the screens. And then what we're going to do is have this condition called whenever the width of the screen exceeds 576 pixels, then we want a certain set of CSS rules to apply. Right? So we are going to then copy over this media query, bring that in, and that is going to handle tablets. So more than 576 pixels, that is going to handle tablets. So notice that it's going to apply about 576 and it's going to continue applying unless further overridden in a subsequent query. Okay, this way we can avoid a lot of repetition instead of setting all the properties for each particular possibility. Okay, then this is maybe going to be the second media query that we'll use, which is for laptops or maybe desktop screens, proper browsers. So this is going to be medium devices or MD, which is going to be above 768 pixels. And then there are also maybe another couple of queries which we may not use, but let's just keep them around. What to do if it's even bigger, if it's bigger than 900 pixels, and if it's even bigger than 1200 pixels. Again, we don't have to use these, but if we want, we can maybe increase the font size, base size a little bit or something like that. All right, so now our basic setup is ready. We have like basic CSS rules that are going to come here. We are going to then add device specific or progressively enhance our design to tablet and desktop. Okay, looks good. Looks good. The next thing to do is to just set up, copy over some of the basic styles without any media queries. So I'm going to first come in here and I'm going to say that the font size, the base font size on mobile is going to be not 16 pixels, but 14 pixels. I just want the font to be slightly smaller. I don't want it to be too big on mobile because otherwise there may not be enough content on the screen to be readable. So let me keep that. And then let me come in here into body. And let us come in and let us set the font size for the body to 1 em. Okay, that is going to be the font size for the body. Then let me come in and let me set, apart from the font size for the body, we've also set here that we've removed the margin padding. All of this needs to go for mobile as well. We've set the font family to Roboto and sans serif, and we've set the body text color to 444444. Okay, great. Let us now set the font family and the font weight for our headers. So we want the inter font family to be used. And remember, these font families have been included using these link tags. You can see here that we've included the inter and the Roboto font family and their various weights. So all of this is common. All of this is going to be present on mobile, tablet, desktop. That's why we're just putting it completely outside. Okay. So that's fine too. Then let us go in and let us set the font sizes for each header. So remember, we are using these REMs. We are using REMs or relative measurements for the headers so that on mobile screens, there are going to be multiples of, or let's set this to 1 rem. On mobile screens, there are going to be multiples of 14. So on mobile screen, you can verify here if I go into effect and I check its computed font size, you can see that it's 35 pixels. 35 is 2.5 times 14. Okay. But as we go on to bigger screens, we're going to set the base font size to 16 pixels. And so the header size is going to increase as well. Okay. What else? Yeah, I think that's what we've added. So we've added HTML, body, H1, H2, and let's add a couple more. Let's add the text color, and let's add the style for the links. Right now you can see that links are underlined. I don't want that, and I want links to be my brand blue color. So that's where I'm going to go in and grab this decoration, text decoration for the links. Let me put that in here as well. Okay. So yeah, so now you can see that if I reload the page, our links have the desired color. They don't have an underline. And on clicking, our links have the desired dark color, or on hover, our links have the desired dark color. Okay. All right. So now this is looking good so far. We have set the base styles. Let me just reload this page. Yeah, we have set the base styles now. And of course, it just spreads out on tablet as well. So there's nothing that really is changing across the different layouts. The first change that I want to use is when we get to a tablet style, I want to use a slightly bigger font size for the body. Okay. So within the media query where we hit a min width of 576, I want to use a slightly bigger font size. So I'm just going to come in here and I am just going to use a bigger font size here. So I'll just come into the first media query, which is over here. And I'm going to put the font size of 16 pixels. Let's move these up. Let's keep all the base styles right at the top so that things are well organized. So these are the base styles. The base font size is 14 pixels. No change here. You can see that the base font size is 14. You can actually go in and check somewhere that the font size is 14. But as soon as we hit a bigger font size, as soon as we hit a bigger screen, as soon as we hit a min width of 576 pixels, the base font size changes to 16 pixels. Okay? You can actually observe this change in the font size by just dragging this. So at 576, the text should become slightly bigger. You can see here that the text became slightly bigger, and not just the text, because we are using rems to set the size of the headings. You can see that the headings have become slightly bigger as well. Okay, so this is one change that you will often see, that from mobile to tablet or maybe from tablet to desktop, there will be a slight change in the font size. Now, of course, you can go ahead and maybe change. Let's say you get a very big desktop, a very big screen. You can use the base font size of 20px. Let me just come in here and let me just show you what that would look like as well. See, whenever we hit 1200 pixels, I want to use 20px. So far it's 16. At some point, it should become 20. Okay, maybe I'm still not hitting 1200 pixels. Let's try that at maybe 992 pixels. Yeah, so you can see that it's small here. So this is the tablet layout, and at 992 pixels, it becomes bigger, right? And then of course, on mobile, it is even smaller. So you have all those. Well, actually, let's set that to 20. So at 992 pixels, it should become bigger. Yeah. So you can see that just around 992 pixels, it starts to become even bigger, right? So at here, this is mobile, and this is tablet, and this is the large desktop. Okay. These are all the variations that you can check, and sometimes you just have to inspect things visually and figure out if you're getting what you're going for. Okay. All right. So now we've changed the base text size, and I encourage you to maybe change some other base styles, maybe change base heading sizes as well, and see what happens. Now, the next thing we'll do is fix the navbar. Okay, so first, let us implement the navbar for mobile. Let's bring this back to about 400, and let us go check the navbar. Okay, so now we need to bring in the basic navbar styles first. So let's bring that in here. The navbar has a padding of 8 pixels and a margin of 0 pixels. So let's just bring that in. I think we can keep that. I don't think we need to change that at all. So I'm just going to bring it all the way at the top. You can see that our navbar is starting to look fine. Now, one thing I want to do in my navbar is not use this entire logo, but maybe use a smaller version of the logo that contains just this icon and not the text. And for that, I have already put up this icon online. So I can just use this link, or I can download it, drag it within my code space and add it to my repository. Both options are available. So let me do one thing. Let me just add this icon into my code as well. So let me just go img id logo. And I'm going to change the icon with the text to logo with text. Okay. Then alt equals Jovian logo. I'm going to change the alt of the existing icon to Jovian logo with text. And let's specify an src. And let us close it. And I think we have a height 30 as well. So let us set a height equals 30 as well. I don't think we need to change the height particularly. Okay. Now we have both these images. We have the icon image, and then we have this logo along with the text. Now we want to show one of these on mobile, and then on tablets, I think we have enough space that we can show the entire logo with the text. So here is how we can achieve this. First, we want to hide this icon. We want to hide this icon. We want to hide the logo with the text on mobile. So by default, I'm going to keep it hidden. And the way to keep it hidden is, let me just select logo with text. So I'm selecting it with the ID. And let me just set display none. There, it's gone. The logo with the text is gone. It's gone not just on mobile, but it's gone on tablet, and it's gone on desktop as well. Now let me make this logo text visible on tablet. So I am just going to go into the tablet style, which is above 576 pixels or min width of 576 pixels. I'm going to say logo with text display. I can just say, I believe I can do block, which is the default. So now it doesn't show up on mobile, which is under 576 pixels, but it does show up on, it does show up here on tablet, and it does show up here on desktop as well. Okay. But of course, we also need to hide the logo. We need to hide this logo icon. So I can just also say over here, logo display block on mobile, and I can just say logo display none on tablets. Okay. So on mobile, I have the logo, only the icon. On tablets, okay, that should say none. On tablets, now I have the logo with the text, and also on bigger screens, I have the logo with the text. So that takes care of the navbar. That is the change that I'm going for. That is the change that we have on our website as well. Okay. All right. So the navbar is taken care of. And the only change we made is added this second image. And we have added the base style where we are putting the padding in the margin. And we have put the logo with text as display none. And we are showing it on tablets and desktops, and we are not showing it on, we're not showing the icon alone on tablets. And notice that once we apply it for tablets, because this only has a min width criteria, not max width, it's going to apply at all bigger sizes. If I want, I can then go in and change it at a bigger size as well. Otherwise, I can leave it as is. So mobile first, progressive enhancement section by section. Okay, let's fix the banner image. So there are a couple of issues with the banner image. One is that it's not taking up the entire width of the page. And second is that I might need to limit the height of the banner image for each of the widths that I'm working with. Okay. And I want to do that. Let me just do that. So the first thing I'll do is go into the banner image. Looks like it has a height. Let me remove the default height so that I can change its height based on the specific breakpoints. And let me come in here and let me just copy over some of the content that I already have for the banner. So we have object fit cover. This is to make sure that depending on what width or height we have, it automatically fills the space, the available space. Okay. And here's the first thing I'm going to do. I am going to first give it a height of just 120 pixels, the banner image, and I'm going to give it a width of 100%. Okay. And I think that looks good. So maybe 150 pixels. Let's see. Yeah, that looks good. So now on mobile, this is what it's going to look like. It's going to take up 150 pixels. and it's going to take up the entire width of the page, and it is going to cover. So if we did not have object fit cover, you can see that it stretches the image, which is not good. I don't want to stretch the image, especially if these are faces of people. So always use object fit cover, or sometimes you might need to use object fit contain if you want the entire image to fit inside, which is not what we want here. We want cover. So let me just put object fit cover. That's what this looks like. Okay, perfect. So that takes care of the banner on mobile, but you can see that it's starting to get cropped on on tablet, and it'll get further cropped as I go bigger. So maybe on tablets, I can increase its height a little bit. So I can say banner. I can give it a height of 220 pixels. How about that? Yeah, I think that looks good. Maybe even 200 pixels should do it. I think that's good. And then here again, it seems to be getting cropped a little bit. So I can come in and I can come in into the next design. And this is the first time I'm touching the desktop design. So far, we've just been updating for tablet, and that has carried over to desktop. So here I can maybe give it a height of 240 pixels, maybe even 250 pixels. This is now looking good. Okay. So I should probably verify that this scales properly. Okay. Maybe I need to give it a little higher. Maybe let's go 300 pixels. Yeah, I think that looks good so far at this as well. But if I wanted, I could even just do something like 250 pixels here. And then on even bigger screens, I could just go in and I could just make that 320 pixels. Okay. So at some point, it's going to become even bigger. All right. So that takes care of the banner. I don't think there are any other changes required. So we've removed the height property that was there on the image, and we've actually set height specifically at various breakpoints. So it's going to start out with 120 pixels. It's going to grow to 200 and then to about 280 pixels or so at a desktops. So that was pretty straightforward. Let us now go ahead and let us now do the about section as well. So this is the about Jovian section. It has this H1, and then it has some text over here, and then it has this image as well. And what we want is, if I go back to our layout, we want the text to show up above the image, still centered, but on desktop, we want them to show up side by side. Okay, let's try and achieve that. So first thing I'm going to do is just copy over the styles for H1. So H1 has text align center. I think that's good. I'm just going to keep that. Okay, but I feel that the space here above and below H1 seems to be very high. So I want to reset that. So I just want to say margin. I just want to set the margin to 8px 0. So just 8 pixels of space above and below should be good enough for me. Maybe I could go 12px. Yeah, 12px looks fine. But of course, that may not look good on tablet and on desktop. So I might then have to go in here and I might need to just put in an H1 margin, let's say 16px on tablet. And I might go in here into desktop, and I might set margin to 20px 0. Okay, so it's about 20 pixels on the desktop, which looks fine. About 16 pixels here on mobile, on tablet, that looks fine. And about 8 pixels here, and I can verify this. I can click inspect. I can go in here into the computed styles and make sure that it has the right. I believe 12 pixels is what we put here. So 12 looks fine. Okay. So that's how you can progressively enhance spacing for the H1. But otherwise, this looks fine to me. Of course, the H1 itself is also bigger because of base font size is bigger. Okay. Next up, we have this about section, which has the ID about. And notice that we have set a, don't need this. Notice that we have set a maximum width for this about section. Okay. So we may not need this maximum width on mobile, but it is still useful on tablet and on desktop. So I'm going to keep it around. So we want to use display flex. That was for the horizontal layout. And then we have given it a max width of 800 pixels, and we've given it a margin 0 auto, and we've given it an internal padding. Let's just check. Okay, so now as soon as we did this, you can see that here it has taken up some space, and now it is showing things left to right. Here is what I can do. Now this is the benefit I get with Flex. I can just set Flex direction column, and I can use Flex direction column so that things, the first and the second section, the description and the image, show up one below the other. And then I can go in and let me see what I want to do for tablet. So for tablet as well, I think I want to keep this layout, but I want to limit the width to about 500 pixels. I don't want it to go all over the place. So I'm just going to put in here max width of 500 pixels, so that on mobile and tablet, it just uses 500 pixels. On tablet also, this looks fine. But definitely on desktop, I want it to take up 800 pixels as it is available, right? So I'm going to go in and I'm going to say for the about section, set the max width not to 500 but to 800 pixels. So now it's taking up 800 pixels, and set the flex direction to row and not column. So now it's going to show up side by side. Okay, this is great, but of course it's not taking up 50% of the space, so I need to fix that as well. So let's come back to the mobile view. Now there are two parts within about. There is the description, and then there is the description, and then there is the image, the team image. So let's first get what we're doing here. So for the description, we have the width of 50% that we need to set only on desktop, and we have a font size as well. So let's just copy these over and let's try to fix them one by one. So let's see here. We are going to use the description. We don't need width 50%, and we probably don't need the padding, right? But we do want the font to be 1.25 rem. So I'm just going to come in here and I am going to go into maybe the large device, because I think this still works for the tablet layout as well. I'm just going to go into the large devices. I'm just going to go into the medium devices, which is more than 768 pixels, which is what this is. And I'm going to add the width condition here under description. Okay, let me add a width of 50% and let me add that padding, right, so that there is space between the description and the image. And now you can see here that the description takes up half the space only on the laptop, desktop, and all the bigger screens. It doesn't take up, it takes up the full space on tablet, and it takes up the full space on mobile as well. And of course, the flex direction also changes from column to row, and that is why the rest of the space is taken up here by this image. Okay, so the next thing to do is to fix this image. So let's see, we are going to get this image. So we have this team div, and it's currently configured to take up only 50% of the space. And I don't think that is necessary here. So I don't think we need to take up 50% of the space here. But I do like this border. And looks like there is a height we have set. So this height is probably coming from the HTML. So I'm just going to remove this height. So this is the team image. I think this is looking good. And this has the full width. If I want, I could limit the height, but I'm not feeling like it. I'll just leave it as is. I think this image is looking good. So I'll just leave it as is. So it's looking good on mobile. It is looking good on laptop, on tablet as well. I think on tablet too, because we've limited the maximum width. On tablet too, the team image is looking fine. Looks fine on tablet. Maybe we might need to configure something to make sure that it is actually showing up properly. Let's just give team a maximum width of, or a width of 100%. Yeah. Still a bit problematic. Well, so there may be some minor fix that we may need to do at the very end, and we'll inspect it and fix it. But for now, this is fine. But where we really need to make a change is over here. So let me do one thing. Let me just fix the height of the image as well. So let me just fix the team image height to 240px. Yes, we don't need it. I think this is fine. Yeah, but now it is taking up too much space. So we need to go in here, and on the large desktop layout, the team div should just take up a width of 50%. Okay, All right, so this is what we're going for. We have the left half, which is, and of course the maximum width is 80 pixels, and it is centered vertically using margin 0 auto. So that is all that is being done on the about section here. Margin 0 auto and max width of 500, and then the max width is increased to about 800 here. The flex direction is row, so that's why this is showing up like this side by side. And the team image is has a width of 50%, so that is looking fine too. Okay, and it looks fine on mobile as well. So on mobile too, this team image is looking good. I don't see any problems here. It looks fine on tablet as well, more or less fine. I don't see any major issues here. We may have to make some change later on, but otherwise this is looking fine. Now, moving right along, the next step for us is the jobs list. So now we need to add a jobs list. Now, if I go back here to our mockup, on the mobile, we have a job list. So we have these cards, and each card has a title, and then each card has maybe one of these jobs listed, right? And on desktop, however, we have a table. How exactly do we achieve that? We can do some kind of magic where we change the display type from div to table and all that. But the simplest way to do it is to just show a list on mobile and hide it on desktop, and then show a table on desktop and hide it on mobile. Okay. So here is what we are going to do. We are going to first take a bunch of HTML. So we're going to create a bunch of divs. So we are going to create a div called job list, and we are going to then have a bunch of divs, each with the class job. And then inside that div, we are going to have a bunch of divs, each with the class job title for the title of the job, and job detail for each detail within the job. Okay. And of course, I have the data for all 4 jobs here. So this is the same data that is present in the table, but now I'm no longer using a table. I'm simply using divs, not even a list. And I can simply copy this. So let me just take this so that I don't have to just type all of these jobs out. Yeah. Let me just take this HTML, and I'm going to go put this into my index.html file right under or right above the jobs table. Okay. So now I have this data of employment opportunities. First, let me change employment opportunities to job opportunities. I think it looks better as job opportunities. So now I have this job opportunities, and I have a list of job opportunities, which are just a bunch of divs. And then I have the table of job opportunities as well. And the list of job opportunities has the ID jobs list, and the table has jobs table. So as you can imagine, what we can do is we can just set display properties for both of these to show and hide them respectively. And while we're at it, let us also fix the display property for this H2. So let's go in here and let's go down. First thing we'll do is for the H2, we are going to set text align center. So let's bring that up. I think we are always going to have text align center for H2. So let me just put that so that H2 has text align center. We may want to once again reduce the spacing above and below the H2. I'll skip that for now, but I'll leave that as an exercise. So use a smaller spacing on mobile and a larger spacing on tablet and desktop respectively. Okay, next up, let us just figure out how to show and hide the job list. So first of all, the entire jobs div itself. Let's see if there is some setting for the entire jobs div. Yeah, so the entire jobs div has a max width of 800 pixels. So let's just take that and let us just put it here at the top. Okay, so the entire jobs div on mobile just takes up the entire width, no issue. On tablet, it takes up the entire width as well, but we might want to limit its width slightly. You can see here at around 600. On tablet, we might want to just center it. We may not want to just show it. We may not want it to take up the entire space. Just like this content is centered, we may want to center it. So how about we use a max width of 500 pixels, just like that, so that the content is centered on the tablet. But then on desktop, we want it to take up slightly more width, right? So this is going up to 800 pixel width. So I'm going to come into the desktop media query, which is laptops, desktops. and which is above 768 pixels. And for the jobs div, I am going to set min width of 800 pixels. Okay. Now you can see that it takes up 800 full pixels on desktop. On tablet, it takes up only about 500 pixels, and on mobile, it takes up the entire space available. Okay, that's good. Let us now set the display criteria for both of these. So I'm going to go in, and there is this jobs list that I have, which I want to have display block by default, and the jobs list, the jobs table, I want to set its display to none. Okay, so now my job opportunities is visible here on mobile. It is visible on tablet, and it is not visible, and it is visible on desktop as well. And this is where I may need to change something. So I need to change the layout here, and I want to hide this and show the table. So let us try and hide this and show the table. Well, so if I go into this layout above 768, I'm going to say jobs list display none. Remember, the jobs list is simply the list of jobs that we have. So that's gone. And I can say jobs table display block. Okay. Now, we don't actually want to use display block here. The default value of display for a table tag, remember jobs table is a table. You can see here it's a table tag. So if you just search default display value for table tag, the default display value for the table tag is, all right, I'll just tell you. The default display value for a table tag is actually table itself. So we need to set display table here. And when we set display table here, what it does is that allows the table to take up the entire width of the screen on most screens. And that will happen once we add some of the other table styles as well. Okay, so just keep that in mind that the default display for a table tag is table. All right. Well, we are doing fine so far. We might need to copy in as soon as the table is visible. We want to use it. We want to set its display to use the entire width. And yes, we have a bunch of these settings as well. So we have the border setting, we have the border collapse setting. And then of course, all the table styles can be incorporated directly into the media query where the table becomes visible. So let's capture all these table related styles. So this is used to set maybe the borders for each table cell. This is used to set a bunch of other things. Now you can see here that our job opportunities table is showing up on desktop, but is not showing up on mobile, is not showing up on tablet and mobile. And this is because jobs table, we are setting its display to table. We can also do block, but you'll notice that in block, it doesn't do what we want. You can see that block is not what we want. We want table because we want it to use the entire available space. Okay, so display table, and below the desktop screen width, we have this display set to none, right? And of course, we have this header row. So we have colors for the header row. We have a bunch of alignments. Then we have these alternate rows. We have borders for these alternate rows. That is something that we specify here. We have a padding to space things out. And for every alternate row, we also have this background color that is done using the nth child. All of this is covered in the previous tutorial. Okay. All right, we're getting there. We're almost there. Now, the only thing left for us to do is style this actual job opportunities, this job opportunities div. Okay, let's try styling it quickly. So the job opportunities div is, this has each of these jobs has the class job. So first I'm going to style the job class, so dot job. And for the job class, I am going to say, let's look at mobile. So I'm going to first give it a border. So border 1px solid. I'm going to use a light gray DDD. Okay. Now they have a border. Then I am going to give it a margin top 4px, maybe even 8px. All right, I'm going to give it a border radius of 5 pixels. Okay, that's nice. Now I have a rounded border. I'm going to give it a padding of 8px. Let's see what that does. Okay, that's looking good. All right, so I have these boxes now. So these boxes are looking good. Then I have job title and job detail. Let me try and quickly style those as well. So job title and job detail. Okay. The job title is, let me see, font size. Let me give it a font size of 1.25 rem that it scales accordingly. Let me give it a font weight of 500. Okay, that's looking good. Let me give it a color of 222222. Okay, color is looking good. And then for job detail, well, let me just give it a margin top of 4 pixels just to space things out a little bit. And let me give a color of, be a slightly lighter color, 555555. Okay, that's looking slightly lighter. Okay, I think that looks good. So I have some job, I have a border, I have this radius around it, I have this title, I have set up all of these details, I've put in some space here as well, and I've given it some weight. So that's looking pretty good. I think that's looking good on tablet as well, and it is centered on the page. And that is looking, that's just not visible on desktop. So with that, we have completed the job opportunities section. So you can see now we have the jobs list on mobile and tablet. And the way we did that was first setting a max width of 500, and then for job giving it a border radius, margin padding. For job title, increasing its font size. For job detail, increasing or making it lighter. And then of course, on the min width of 768, we increase the max width of jobs so that it's a little bigger on desktop, and we set the job list display to none. For the jobs table, on by default, we set its display to none. And once we reach that 768 width, when we want to display it, we set its display to table. We make it full width. We give it a border, border collapse, and we give all those settings which are required to show the table properly. Okay. All right. We're on the last leg here. Let's go ahead and fix the application form as well. The first thing I'm going to do is just pull out all these application form settings right all the way to the top. So let's see. Have application, form group, form input, etc. All of that. Okay, so how it works is we have this application div, and inside this application div, we have an application form, which is a form with the ID application form. Then each of these inputs and labels are together part of a form group. Okay, so we're going to use all these styles, and we have a bunch of custom styles that we have set up for all of these. So let us go in and do that. Let's see. Let's come in all the way to the top above any media queries, and let us paste the styles. And this is what we end up with. So now we have, for the application itself, the max width is 800 pixels. So it takes up the full width, which is not what we want. Let's set the max width to 500 pixels instead. Okay, that's fine. And now it is in line on tablet. It is all centered. But of course, we can go in and on the desktop version, we can increase the max width. So we can say hash application max width to be 800 pixels, so that on desktop, it still takes up the entire width. It's looking good. I think the only change I'm going to make here, it actually looks fine. The only change I want to make here is maybe make the inputs full width. So I am going to come in here. I'm going to change this to dot form group because that is going to be more specific. So in each form group, I want the label to have a certain, I want the input to have the width of about 80%, let's say, so that all the inputs are about 80% wide, something like that, maybe even 90%, just going very close to full width. Yeah. So I want all my inputs to be about 90% wide on mobile. But as soon as I get to the tablet, so on tablet, I don't want it to be 90% wide. So I'm just going to go in here on tablet. I'm just going to set input select text area. Text area doesn't need to be modified. I'm just going to set max width or width to be about, to be auto. Okay. So on mobile, it takes up about the full width, and that's nice. And on, I can remove this width 80% here and set that manually here. So dot form group text area. For text area, we still want it to be a bit wide, about 80% wide, or even on tablet. Okay. So on tablet, what this is what it looks like. The application on mobile looks like this, almost full width. The application on tablet looks like this. So it is not taking up the full width, but it is still centered on the page along with the rest of the content. And the application on desktop looks like it used to. There's no change there. Okay. So that's nice. The final thing we need to do is fix the footer. So we have a footer right at the bottom. Let's go ahead and fix the footer. The first thing we'll do is just copy over all the existing styles. We don't need this h3, we don't need this apply, I'll get rid of that. So we just have footer, footer links li, and copyright. So let's see that. With that, we've exhausted all the styles. Yeah, so we've carried over all the styles. So let me just go in right at the top. Before we create any media queries, let's put in the footer styles and let's see what that gives us. Now we have a footer which has this background that we're looking for, and it has these links, and it has this copyright. All of that is good. But on the mobile, we want these links to show up one below the other. And how do we do that? Well, you see, we have this display inline for li. I think we can get rid of this. So the links are going to show up one below the other. Okay. And looks like they're centered now, but they're slightly off center. So if I just inspect this list, I can figure out why it is off center. All of this seems to be centered, but looks like this UL, this unordered list seems to have a padding on the left. You see that green color thing? That is just this padding on the left. Let's go into the footer links list and let us just set padding left to 0. Okay. All right. So that's what we have here. We have this footer div, then we have the footer links UL, and then we have a bunch of LIs. And that is now showing the footer items one below the other. I may even add some margin bottom. So I can say margin 4px and 16px. So now I have a margin bottom so that they're slightly spaced out, maybe even 8px. Okay, so this footer is looking nice. Okay, let's see on tablet. Now on tablet, this footer is probably not looking good. I think I can just get it back to inline. So on tablets, I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to say footer links li display inline, and let's see. Okay, so on tablets it is inline. On mobile it is still one below the other. This is what I'm expecting. And on desktop it is inline. Perfect. With that, we have completed the footer. So we've done all the sections. I think all of them look good on mobile, tablet, and desktop. So that's good. We have done the changes to the application form. The only changes we made was some width adjustments for the inputs. And we have done the changes for the footer. The only change we made was that we wanted to show them one below the other on mobile and side by side on desktop. And again, practice this, work it out step by step. That is how all of these steps will make sense. We can now review and deploy these changes. So what we're going to do is first we're going to create a branch. Just going to do that here by first opening the terminal. So let's say file view terminal. I'm going to first create a branch. So let's do git checkout -b. -b is a quick shortcut to create and check out a branch in one step. And let me just call it responsive layout. Okay, now we've switched to a new branch. We've created a new branch and switched to it. You see we are on the branch responsive layout. Now I'm going to do git add dot. I'm going to review the changes using git status. You can see that a bunch of new files have been added. There's a settings.json as well. Not sure what that's for, but it's okay. Then I'm going to do git add. Okay, I'm just going to do git commit -m added responsive layout. Now we've committed it. Normally I would commit after every section and keep updating my pull request, but just for now, just for example, doing that. Then let me do git push origin responsive layout. Okay, so we stage the changes using git add, we then commit the changes using git commit, and then we create push that branch to GitHub using git push origin branch name. Okay, now we can create a pull request. So there's actually a helpful link here that is printed out for us, but we could always just go on the repository page, and on the repository page you can see that GitHub tells us that a responsive layout branch has just been pushed and we can create a pull request. So here's what we can do. We can say added a responsive layout for the jobs page, and I can mention changes, and I can just bring in the changes that I've made here. So let's see. Navbar has a logo without text. Then banner size is updated based on screen. Then about section is vertical first, then horizontal. And then we have the jobs list on mobile and tablet, and table on desktop. What else? Application form full with inputs on mobile, and vertical footer items on mobile. Okay, just a short description of the changes, and we can create this pull request. And now you can see that our Jovian Careers responsive site, which is our initial website, Jovian Careers responsive dot Vercel dot app, live dot Vercel dot app. This is still not updated. This still has the old design. In fact, I can go in and to inspect, and I can verify this, that it's still trying to show the table. It's still trying to show things side by side. But now you can see that in this particular pull request, Vercel has created a preview deployment. So I can visit this preview deployment. This is just for this branch. And you can see that on this preview deployment, if I go inspect, we have our new layout. So this is what you want to do. Your main website is as is, no changes there. But on your pull request, you've made all these changes on your branch and you can test it out. So somebody who is looking at your branch can first look at the preview deployment, and maybe the designer can take a look and tell you, okay, maybe you need more space above submit application. Maybe there is some change to be done in job opportunities. Maybe the footer is not looking nice. Let me rework that a little bit. You can also maybe just see how things change. You can see that, okay, job opportunities takes up the full space, then it sticks to around 500 pixels, then it suddenly expands. And now when it expands, here you get this 2-column layout, and here you get this table. And that is looking rather nice. And the application also expands accordingly. So the designer or maybe another developer can review the changes visually by looking at the preview. They can also review the changes manually. So they can go in and they can actually check in each section. Okay, looks like we've added a displayed.html file. They can tell you maybe we don't need this displayed.html file, get rid of it. We don't need this flexbox.html file, so you can go and delete those files and update your pull request. And okay, they can see a split. So there's a split view available as well. Let me just split view. Yeah, you can see a split view. Yeah. So they can see here the changes that have been made, that you have added this jobs list as expected, and you've not modified any other HTML except adding the job list and changing the title here. They can see here that you've added a bunch of base styles for mobile and you've made it 14 pixels. You've not changed a lot else, maybe a few things here and there. And they can give you inputs on specific things. They can give, okay, this doesn't look right. And they can comment it, and then you can revise those comments and pull your branch again and so on. And they can see that, okay, now you've added a bunch of these media screen settings and all. So this is a good way for you to even do a self-review before you merge your changes to master. And once the changes are approved, then you can go in and you can get an approval, and then you can merge this pull request to master. Okay. Now, as soon as the pull request is merged to master, What Vercel is going to do is it's going to pick up the new changes from the master branch and it's going to create a new deployment. You can check this on vercel.com that it is going to create a new deployment just now. You can see here that's creating a new deployment created just now by Sydney Jovian. And now if I reload the page, notice that I'm on the deployed main branch, Jovian Careers Responsive Live.app.vercel.app, and I reload the page and the layout is fixed. This is the layout. Now the main page has gone live. So this is the workflow that you need to get used to. Create a branch, do your work, test it out in a preview deployment, and then merge it. And then your layout is going to be fixed. Now we've created a responsive design just like that. And that is something that you're going to experiment with in your next assignment. Okay, so we staged and committed the changes, pushed the changes to GitHub, reviewed the code, tested the preview deployment, made some, if we can required, we can make some final adjustments, iterate on it, and then the pull request can be merged to the main branch and it gets deployed. And this is the final mobile layout. I think this looks pretty good. It's everything is readable, everything takes up sort of the full width. This is the final tablet layout. So we're centering the content on the page to about 500 pixels. We're limiting its width so that things are still readable. And this is the final desktop layout. Notice that we did not have wireframes for tablet, but we just use some components from this side and some from that side to build it. And as an exercise, try adding more sections to the site, try to implement them using a mobile first responsive design, try creating a separate wireframe for the tablet screens and make changes to the page to implement it. And then one other thing we did not look into was the media type print. What happens when you try to print this page? So you can do that by trying to do Command P and then trying to save it as a PDF. And you'll see what your page is going to look like. Okay, so by default, it just picks up whatever is going to show up on the screen. But for a printout, you may need to do a separate layout, and that is something that you can experiment with. The media print query. Okay, so that's everything for today. We looked at how to use CSS media queries and breakpoints to implement a mobile-first responsive web design. We looked at how to leverage various CSS properties, specifically Flexbox, to build fluid and dynamic layouts. Needs a lot of practice. So we will use Flexbox extensively over the next several months. So don't worry, you'll get enough practice. We looked at how to create separate wireframes or design mockups to determine the layout of a web page at various breakpoints. You always should separate the design and the implementation. Don't try to do them both together. You will get stuck. We looked at implementing, testing, and deploying a responsive website using CSS media queries and Flexbox. And the best way to learn these skills is to follow along step by step and type out all the code yourself. And you can check out the completed code here using these links. I have included a ton of resources here. The idea is not that you need to go through all of these resources right now. A few I would recommend though is a responsive web design or media queries tutorial on CSS tricks, the video course by Wes Boss on What the Flexbox. But there are a bunch of others. No matter what you are feeling scared about or not confident about or doubtful about, check out one of these resources. You should be able to figure it out if one of the concepts that we covered today did not make sense. And that's it.